Hello, my friends. It is David Ault, and I am so honored and thankful to have you spend a little bit of your time to join me here for the gathering. This space, this connection is intended to be an exploration where you and I travel together to perhaps untangle ourselves from old stories and stale ideas that prohibit us from fully realizing the magnificence of what we are. And I believe personally that what we are at our core is that brilliant magnificence. We are emanations of the divine. We are instruments. We are souls that are here for a divine appointment. And what happens in that appointment and in that journey is a lot of forgetting. We're not condemning the forgetting because it's really tricky to be in this plane of existence. Call it earth, call it life, whatever it is, but it is one of countless planes of form. And yet what we know about this one is the rule of thumb. The game is dualism. And every single day we are confronted with the us and the them, the right and the wrong, the good and the bad, the haves and the have-nots. So it's understandable that we would delve into forgetfulness. And so the gathering is intended to kind of shake ourselves up from our sleeping self to reawaken to that infinite potentiality, that truth, and that honor. And it's always my hope that even if it's a phrase or an idea, that those things are seeds that plant themselves in your consciousness and you explore them and you consider them. And perhaps even you let one of those veils of forgetfulness be freed so that you can experience the infinite nature and the infinite potential of what you are. And so it's important, it's valuable that we do this kind of thing. It's important that you find your tribe of voices and influence and environment that support such a quest as it is for me. And so I know that I'm committed to being able to be a mouthpiece and hopefully an example of how this is possible. And I look to those who have influenced me, who have helped me move on the spectrum of awareness to shed a bunch of old ideas. And even though always I'm vacillating between remembering and forgetting, that I'm remembering more that I'm forgetting, and that I keep moving more and more and more into the space of willingness and evolution. So that's why we're here together. And one of the people, one of the voices, one of the teachers that has been instrumental in my development has been Ram Dass. And if you've been watching for any time, I'm sure you've heard me reference him many, many times. And I'm one of countless souls who are indebted to him and his journey and his transparency. He was so beautifully transparent in being honest about his stumblings and fumblings along the spiritual path. And that's kind of what endeared me to him, because I could identify in so many ways. What's well known about his journey, Ram Dass's journey, is that his life changed when he met a guru. The guru's name is Neem Karoli Baba. And if you Google Neem Karoli Baba and do any kind of research, he also goes by the name Maharaji, you will come to see that he is one of the most revered saints, gurus, wisdom teachers, and I'm going to add this phrase, perfected beings that have incarnated and have been on the planet. And so that phrase, perfected being, is kind of where I want to lead you to today. So I've reread and re-listened to much of Ram Dass's material about that particular moment in his interaction with Neem Karoli Baba, having traveled to India, not necessarily to meet this person, but the journey bringing him to him, and the inevitable pinnacle moment where Ram Dass said, for the first time in his entire life, he was swept up in the unconditionality of love. Now, let me explain a little bit what I believe that is. So I want you to imagine all of the roles that we assume, all of the ways in which we try to hide particular things about us. And we do that because we are afraid that if people knew everything about us, that we would be discarded, that we would be abandoned, that we would be judged. And I'm talking everything. I'm talking about the secrets that you don't tell a soul. I'm talking about all of the perhaps shame and memorable moments and missteps that we just kind of sweep under the rug. So I want you to imagine that if you are in the presence of a perfected being, and we're going to talk about what that means too, but that when you are in the presence of something that already knows all of that, that sees all of that, all of that, all of the things that you have never said, and in the presence of that, in the communion with that perfected being, you are stripped down to nothing but the unconditionality of how loved you are. That would be a moment. That would be an inevitable, complete shift in how we engage and navigate through life. And so not only did that happen to Richard Alpert, who then became Ram Dass through that meeting with Neem Karoli Baba, but also with countless other people who journeyed to this country to meet this person, who the native Indian population, who have story after story after story. I mean, volumes of stories of how this person, quote, quote, engaged in the miraculous or did the miraculous. And so it isn't a matter of whether or not you believe that, but more importantly, what I'm wanting to focus on is, do you have a belief or a possible acceptance of the idea of a perfected being or a perfected energy? And so if you can kind of hold that idea for a moment, I want you now to explore with me how that relates to the idea of oneness. Follow along. So you've got this idea of a perfected being, unconditionality. Traditional Judeo-Christian text paint God or Jesus to be forms of that. However, they've thrown in this caveat that you are born of sin, and that unless you are redeemed from that and then behave in a particular way, that unconditionality has conditions, which is a complete total fallacy, right? But the being of Jesus is also considered to be someone who evolved into and transported and achieved this perfected being nature. Buddha is another example. Mohammed, another example. There are many examples that religions have built themselves around. Now, I want you to imagine that there are countless perfected beings that you know nothing of. Beings that have existed and exist even in present time, that live on this planet. Some perhaps in caves in the Himalayas, some walking the streets, and we see them on a daily basis. But they're sort of on assignment, and the assignment that they are on is to help assist those of us who are still struggling and waffling in the forgetting and remembering. Did you follow that? Consider that there are perfected beings, beings that are here to hold the light, to be lighthouses in the density and the darkness of duality. They're not announcing themselves. They're not writing books. They're not holding seminars. They're not charging you for anything. They're just doing the work. And I have come to believe, particularly after visiting the Himalayas, and I don't believe perfected beings are secluded and sequestered into a geographical area, but there really is something to the energy of the different territories around the Himalayas, or the Himalayas, as some people pronounce them, of these beings. I've been in some of those caves. I've felt those things. And I find great comfort and joy in realizing that there are beings who are advocating on my behalf for my reawakening. Okay? So Neem Karoli Baba is an example of a perfected being. He just happens to be known, and there happens to be many, many, many generations of witnesses that were in the presence of his work and his love and his influence. So what would a perfected being be? Well, now we talk about multidimensionality. Now we talk about the fact that we are very familiar, because we're engaging in this particular plane, this plane we call Earth, this galaxy we call the Milky Way. We're somewhat understanding of the rudimentary mechanics of this particular plane. And now I want you to quantify and hold the idea that there are innumerable planes of existence. Innumerable, countless, innumerable trillions of galaxies. And that if we try to merge this spiritual principle that all is one, then it means that the soul of you, not necessarily your name and your identity in this particular persona, but the soul of you is connected to all of that. And the soul of you is also connected to whomever these perfected beings are. And wildly, if we go up and up and up and out and out and out into the spiraling of the one, like, what is that ultimate pinnacle oneness? It's that we all return to that perfected being nature. Yes, even you. Yes, even me. And so it means that when you hear, again, poems and phrases like, for example, the 12th century poet Rumi, who said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop. You are not some random being that is clawing its way into existence and survival in a sea of other beings. You are the perfected being. You are absorbed into that which is the all. You are. I am." Pause for a moment. So when you hear the quote, "You're not a drop in the ocean, you are the ocean in a drop," we go, "Oh, isn't that nice?" But have you sat with that and really considered what you are? Not who you are, but what you are. You are a form, an instrument, a vessel of the perfected beingness of the all as you. You experience that to the degree that you remember that. And not only remember that, but then choose to embody and live as it. How do you do that? How do I allow the perfected being nature, behavior, belief, awareness to be with us on the day to day. So we start to break down our fears. We start to break down our behaviors. I've noticed a lot of times lately in the circle around me that people are the identities of us in this dual system have a sort of outrage addiction. An outrage addiction. And so we're outraged by so many things. And there are many things seemingly to be outraged about in this plane of form. What then would the perfected being do? How would it see the form? It wouldn't see actually what we see. What we see is the disparagement and the hopelessness of the inequality and the disregard and the inhumanity that we bounce around and express and serve to one another in a very, very disheartened way. The perfected being does not see that. The perfected being sees unadulterated harmony. And yet, it does not deny that in this plane, there is this small r reality. So what we're dealing with is the paradox of macro and micro. Macrocosm, the macrocosm, which is the capital R reality, the reality of the perfected being, and what you and I have to put up with on a daily basis, which is small r reality, the reality of form, all of those things, the inequality and the disparagement and the inhumanity that we express to one another, which prompts and forms this continuous outrage. So what does that outrage do? It builds and fosters a sense of fear. All of that fear and all of that rage and the energy that is exuded in that is a form of forgetfulness. And so when we are not shaken from that, then we live this existence predominantly in that forgetfulness. And the lawful nature of that choice then keeps the inhumanity and the inequality in perpetuity. It just keeps coming because we don't shake ourselves from seeing the capital R reality. What actually happened to Ram Dass in that interaction with Neem Karoli Baba, when all of that burden just melted instantaneously, was that everything that was small r reality to him, everything that was struggle and strife and shame and fear, instantly melted. And in that moment, what he experienced was the capital R reality, the insight, the feeling, and the rapturous nature of what the perfected being sees and feels with regularity. So Neem Karoli Baba had no concern whatsoever on outward appearance. A very enormous Indian man who just wore a blanket, didn't write any books, didn't really have any kind of specific teachings or guidelines other than to love, to serve, and to remember. That was it. That was the extent of his teaching. To love. Love what? Love others as you would love others. To love others, to love your neighbor as you love yourself, to love the other because there is no other, to serve those who are in need, to do so unconditionally without announcement and fanfare, to feed those who are hungry, to clothe those who are naked, to house those who have no place to go, to serve, to be the bodhisattva, to help elevate the suffering in this small r reality. And then to remember to remember that the true reality, the capital R reality, is that the only thing that exists is God. And you start to see the conflict in that if we're so sequestered in this single plane of existence. Because why? Because we see the suffering. And then you have a perfected being saying, it's all God. And there's a disconnect there because we're trying to force the singular dimensional experience as the capital R reality, and it's not. And so yin yang tells us that there will always be this balance of dark and light. And so if you and I truly want to lean more into the remembering, more into the embodiment of how the perfected being is, then it means that when we come face to face with the challenge, whether it's some type of discomfort or some type of interaction with someone out in the day-to-day existence of our world that gets us upset, if we become so fragile and so influenced by each and everything of that, we just perpetuate more of that. But if we use this human experience, when we see the disenfranchisement and the dis-ease and the inequality, and we go to it as the perfected being would go to it out of genuine love and service. No concern about, well, I don't want them to take everything. We just freely give. Do you start to see then lawfully how that builds the practice of being able to see that perfection more and more and more? All kinds of spiritual paths tell us that God is love, that there is a perfect patterning, that there is infinite intelligence. And yet every day we are pushing that aside because we're too seduced and consumed by our addiction to outrage. But people, a perfected being, are assuming and allowing that which is the perfection of that being to be in us because we're also a part of that ocean. Can you imagine the more that we take ownership of that behaviorally, from an embodied standpoint, and from our actions, that we become that which we wish to see in the world? We become the peace. We become the catalyst for change. So the idea then of a perfected being isn't so outrageous. It isn't so mythical. It isn't so outside of us. And we hope maybe someday that we might experience that. It's that there are perfected beings walking all around us. Some people call them angels. Some people call them whatever, beings from another planet. I don't know. I'm just telling you that undeniably that perfection exists, and it exists within the utmost chaos, in the utmost pain. And so the idea is not to announce it and say, oh, well, it's here, so wake up and accept it. It's to be it in the chaos. It is to be it in the way in which you show up and you serve and you share and you love. Do you see? Because in that way, we reveal the perfected beingness as us. What is it like for you to consider that you are a part of that? That, my friend, I believe is the way in which we lean in and become the solution, the gift, the availability of God in, as, and through us. I invite you to go and read and listen to some of Ram Dass's story and the beginnings of how he met his guru. to listen to him tell about that moment when he was completely naked in the eyes of this being. The being knew everything, everything about him. And this is wild, not just in this incarnation, but everything about his soul. And when we know that inevitably we win, meaning we cannot help but return back to the one, I hope that you find in your journey of peeling away a peace, a relaxation, an unclenching of the fists of striving, and that you can begin to breathe deeper, to become more still in a meditative practice. And yes, to trust that all is well. You are loved so much. Till next time.